This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey alongside Brian Tripp with you here for a big Week 5 in the conference. We have a top 20 matchup. Number 19 Illinois going to on the road at number 9 Penn State. Some other really intriguing Week 5 matchups here as well. Max Ralph of Penn Live will join us to kind of a deeper dive here into this big top 20 matchup at Beaver Stadium on Saturday night. Of course, we'll give you Week 5 picks. We have some interesting comparisons here. Let's break down the top 3 teams, Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State here at the top, and see how these teams stack up so far through the first month of the season. It's a great podcast, so thank you for joining us here. But Tripp, we start not with previewing games here, but with some really interesting college football news. So we learned earlier on Wednesday morning, UNLV quarterback Matthew Sluka is leaving the program over an NIL dispute. He was promised one thing, not given another. So now he has left the team and will pursue other opportunities here next season. And then we learned a few hours later, USC defensive lineman Bear Alexander announced he's going to redshirt the rest of the season and will no longer play in any of USC's remaining games. He'll have 2 years of eligibility left. Is this now a trend, do you think, we're going to see now in what is just this modern day college football?
I've read so many different stories, social media posts, people asking, what is college sports? What are college sports now? What can I make of college football? This isn't the college football. Well, here's what to make of it. College football used to be a sport controlled by the coaches and administrators. College football is now ruled by the players. Or if you still want to use a term that is outdated in today's day and age because they are paid, student athletes, they now control college football. Coaches are now recruiting not only incoming players, but every single day, every coach at every program is also recruiting their own players. They are playing players in games to keep them happy, to keep them on their team for the long term. And they have to balance doing what's best, even in the heat of a moment in a football game, balance doing what's best that's going to give me the opportunity, best opportunity to win on a Saturday, and give me the best opportunity to keep my players happy so I have them long term at each position. Now, some teams may say, go kick rocks. I don't want that attitude or personality, but it is a real factor that every coach in college football is now encountering because the players have more freedom. Some will argue that's really good. Some will argue that it's gone too far. The players have freedom and the players have control. So that's the era of college football that we're now living in.
And I think if you want to talk about blame, who's to blame here? I think the first group to blame is the NCAA, in part because they buried their heads. They didn't think anything was going to change. They never envisioned a day, so they never planned for a day in which college athletes are getting paid. And now, like you said, with the power balance seemingly overnight shifting from one side to the other with no real in-between or no meeting in the middle, this is kind of in part what you get. I will say, I think this is obviously a very different situation here compared to what we saw the Matthew Sluka incident that really kind of took over college football on Wednesday. He left because of money and false promises. Bear Alexander is leaving, or at least redshirting, I should say, this season, more because he's frustrated with his playing time. He's not a starter. He only played 21 snaps against Michigan. So he's upset about his usage and decided, I'm going to preserve a year of eligibility. And I guess in his mind, thinking that this year's already lost a few games into the season. And I think, Tripp, for me, I think this is more of a one-off situation. Like, we've not seen this happen too often. You got to go back to Kelly Bryant at Clemson as the really last high-profile player to kind of pull this move, where once Kelly Bryant was benched for Trevor Lawrence, this was back in 2018 at Clemson. He left the team, preserved a year redshirt so he could play another year. Other than that, we've not seen a lot of players pull this specific in-season move where they are healthy and take themselves out of the rotation and say, I'm not playing again. And I think with what we've learned so far, what we've read, what we've seen, the explanations, this to me feels like more of a bad judgment move than just college football being broken. I don't. Things change. I just don't think right now quitting on your team in this instance is the best for I just don't think it's the best thing right now for what Bear Alexander's career is. I don't think this is the move where if you want to transfer to another school, get your career back on track, I don't think pulling this move and having that mindset is the best thing for you, to be honest.
Is Bear Alexander on USC next year?
No, I think there's no chance.
Then he is playing the system. No, I don't think so. But he is trying to play the system. You cannot have the best of both worlds in this instance. He is trying to redshirt, still train, still practice with the team. But then the second the portal opens at the end of the year, he's out. So not only is he not committed to his team, he is trying to manipulate the system. And you say, oh, this could be a one-off incident. All it takes is one public case of this happening, and this could happen at other schools. Now, do I believe this is the only player in the country that is demanding to redshirt and is planning to do this? No. I think coaches deal with this on a day-to-day basis all across the country, that there are players where they know. I mean, you're telling me right now at Power 4 schools, there's not a few players that you know, because of where they stand on the depth chart, you know they're transferring at the end of the season. But the question is, can you keep them in your locker room where it's not going to detract from your team? But that usually happens quietly and behind closed doors, and you can kind of keep that situation. This is a very public instance where a player is coming out and making that statement. If I'm Lincoln Riley, I'd say, you know what? You want a redshirt? I know you're not going to be here next year. You're not with us. You can't be at practice, can't train with the team, because that then detracts from the rest of his teammates. And to your point, you know, if you're trying to get to the next level, this is the whole thing, right? His dad, Tony's like, Bear wants to be a starter, leader of the defense. What kind of quality, if you're an NFL team, how do you look at these traits and say, I want this? If you're another, right? But eventually all it takes is one, two people, coaches, GMs, scouts, whatever it is, to say, oh, he's really talented. We're giving him a chance anyway. And that's what he's going to hope for in the portal after the season. I think there's a lot of good that has come out of the new era of college football, you know, with what's going to happen with revenue sharing. And there's so much money in players' rights. The NCAA, schools, they are so afraid of being sued, and they're so afraid of the government stepping in. That's why there is so few rules, regulations. There are so few rules, regulations, and there also is no legislation on this era of college football in fear of litigation down the road, because we're seeing litigation cases pop up from the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years in college football, and these entities are being burnt by it. So that's why there isn't the red tape. It's led to a lot of good, but it's led to some bad. And this is one of those cases of bad that can happen because there are loopholes and a lack of rules and regulations, intentionally a lack of rules and regulations that are in place.
You mentioned trying to game the system. That's exactly what he's doing. But I would say this move is hurting Bear more than helping him, just because there were rumors back in the spring that he was going to enter the transfer portal and leave. He didn't do it, right? And now is the time. If you want to leave, then you're right. You see the depth chart. Maybe this is not, I'm not going to get as much playing time. I'm going to go somewhere else. That happens all the time, and good for players. You want to go somewhere you can play. You're right. But to commit to the team for 2024, and then a few games and say, you know what? I don't like my role. I'm out of here. That's adversity that I think other coaches, and like you said, the next level, they want to see, how do you battle through? It's not all going to be, sunshine and rainbows here.
Do you think this would be different if they beat Michigan? Like, winning is the greatest elixir. Would this be different if they beat Michigan? And 21 snaps, I know against Michigan it's like 2 drives, but 21 snaps is 3, 4, 5 possessions in a game, especially as a defensive lineman where you're rotating in and out. That's not insignificant. That is playing a quarter to a third of the snaps.
I would say no. I think the result is irrelevant, because we talked about in the new 12-team playoff, USC is still very much alive for a playoff spot. It's still very much alive in the Big Ten to go to the Big Ten title game. Like, you play Penn State here in a few weeks. Like, you have still opportunities to play Notre Dame to get a really good non-conference win. You can add that to the LSU game. Like, you have plenty of chances here to still make a playoff run and be one of the 12 teams. I think for me, like this, it's more of a playing time than wins and losses or ability to play in a big game, which again, I think is just bad advice and bad judgment, because I don't think this is going to work out the way you think. And I think this move will be held more against you. Like you hear football coaches all the time talk about, being together, being, it's like a military mindset. You don't quit. That's one of the few things you don't do in season is quit on your team, quit on your guys. Mm-hmm. And that's what he's doing. And what I'm fascinated to see too, Trip, here, this is very early on. Like this broke late last night. We were recording this on Thursday morning. So we're about, let's say 12 or 13 hours into this news as we're reacting to it. The plan, and that's why I say that about how early the news is, the plan is for him to stay on the team and still practice. Like you said, basically practice, get all the benefits of still staying in shape, but just not playing in the game.
That's his plan. That's his plan.
I'm shocked if that plan comes to fruition. I don't know how, if you're Lincoln Riley, you say, hey, you come back. You just quit on us, but you come back. You practice, I guess, on the scout team, and we're going to keep you in shape. So that way the next team you go to, you'll still be in football shape so you can kind of keep on going and work on your game. I think there's no shot in hell by next Monday, let's say after this weekend, that Bear Alexander's still on the team and practicing. That just to me seems ridiculous.
Well, these players are now employees, and I would like to be an employee that could go to my boss and say, hey, my plan's to work 1 day a week. I'll take my full salary.
I guess you don't know until you don't ask, right?
Yeah.
Holy cow. But yeah, that's why I also think lastly here, Joe, like we could, again, different cases could happen here, but when you talk about like big name players, and he was a top 60 recruit, so he's like a big name player here
on a defensive line that like they need him. That is an area they don't have a lot of depth. The USC defense got pushed around at Michigan, certainly has made strides early in the year. Not only is it significant because of the overarching college football issues that we're encountering now and what's a hot button issue topic and will be for the foreseeable future. For USC, this impacts USC. You just took a top 4 defensive lineman, someone that's in there too deep, off their roster at a position they can ill afford to be losing guys right now due to, hey, I'm not happy with my playing time.
Let me ask you this on that, because he's very talented, like you said, and the depth is questionable. So you need the body without a doubt. Could this actually benefit USC going forward? Because if you have a disgruntled player who I'm sure is, not keeping quiet, at practice or to his teammates about, I should be playing more, can't believe this guy's playing more. I mean, Bears guardian is tweeting out videos of his replacement getting blown off the ball against Michigan. It's almost like OBJ's dad when he was tweeting out Baker Mayfield missing his son wide open a few years ago with the Browns. It's just like, that is so toxic that even though you were losing a talented player, could it actually benefit the Trojans going forward? Because now you have less of a distraction. And if anything, you can feel more unified as a unit, but as a team. That's kind of what I feel.
Yeah, I think you can have that addition by subtraction. I think I've seen it personally within the last 3 to 4 months. And I think you can see it across college football. Yes, you can have addition by subtraction.
So it's definitely a story that we will be monitoring and obviously watching here. The plan is for Bear to still practice. We'll see if that's the case, but definitely some interesting news here on Wednesday, both with UNLV's QB leaving for NIL disputes and now Bear Alexander at least not playing and opting to redshirt this season, preserve 2 years of eligibility because he wasn't getting the playing time he thought he deserved on that USC defensive line. All right, let's talk about on the field. Now, you had a great idea this week going into this pod, and let's break it down now that we have a 1 month of football in the books here. The top 3 teams in the conference, Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State, in no order here. Let's break down by position which of those 3 teams has the edge so far from what you've seen through the first month of the year. Kind of give us a way to kind of compare these 3 teams so far from what we've seen in the first month against different competition, but still kind of give us a nice gauge so far of who the best teams in the conference are. You want to get us started?
Yeah, and I thought this was a really good idea because when we were talking on Monday,
because it was yours?
Because when we were talking on Monday, we've talked so much about Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State as the class of the Big Ten, but we've never really given our reasons why, and they've been, for the most part, right? Oregon's had some hiccups, Penn State's had some hiccups. Ohio State wasn't happy they allowed 14 points to Marshall last week. They didn't name a defensive player of the week because that was unacceptable. But these 3 teams, truly, what makes them so great? So let's go position by position, I thought. and say, okay, who's the best of the group? And we've said that Ohio State's kind of one, and then maybe Penn State and Oregon 2A, 2B. But is that truly, truly the case? Quarterback. Who has the best quarterback of the three? Ohio State, Will Howard, Oregon, Dylan Gabriel, and Penn State, Drew Aller. I'll be honest here. This one actually gave me some pause because I think the ceiling for Drew Aller, from what I've seen so far at Penn State, and some of the tight window throws he made against a bad team, Kent State, last week, but he's made so far this season, his running ability, his maturity, what he's meant, the sample size isn't there yet to say it. I was back and forth between Oregon and Penn State on this one. I'm going to go Oregon and Dylan Gabriel, but I'm adding a little bit of an asterisk there that I think Penn State might have something in Drew Aller. And that's not me being a homer because that's the team I cover every week. But Oregon, best quarterback.
That's really interesting. Like for me, I'm going to hold out judgment on Drew Aller just till I see it against a little bit better competition. And that's why I give the edge to Oregon. It's not only Dylan Gabriel, but it's also his body of work. I understand this is the first year at Oregon, but what he's done at UCF and Oklahoma, and now in the short sample size with the Ducks, he's been accurate. He's pushed the ball down the field. I mean, he's barely, having any incomplete passes. He's throwing the ball all over the yard, especially when defenses kind of know, hey, Oregon's not running the ball very consistently, so they're going to have to lean on the pass game. Even with that, knowing that, they're still putting up some prodigious stats here and moving the ball. I still have Dylan Gabriel number one. I would agree with Drew Aller number two. And climbing, this next month here is going to be really big. It's going to be really fascinating to watch all three quarterbacks, obviously, but especially those two at the top here as the competition increases, obviously with Ohio State coming to town here in a few weeks to Eugene, how Gabriel does play. But it is, I would agree. I think it's definitely a tighter race 1 month into the year than I ever would have envisioned, let's say in the preseason if we did this.
Running back, I think all the teams are really good. But Ohio State has right now, the start of the year, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins. I can't imagine a better 1-2 punch at the running back position, not across college football this year, but I think as this year progresses, you may start going back and talking about, the tandem Georgia had, Minnesota. This could be one of the historic running back tandems in college football history, Henderson and Quinshon Judkins.
I agree. I'm with you 100%. And the frustrating part, if you want to call it that, is we'll only get 1 year of it, whereas some of the other ones you had 2 or 3 years of these talented tandem backfields. But I'm with you. Like this, they are the real deal. I know against lesser competition, it's how much they're going to get challenged, but already so far they're showing, they're worth busting off some big runs. Like I'm with you. Like all three running back rooms are really, really good. But Ohio State, with the talent they have right now and the production they've showed out so far, I'm with you. They have the edge here.
So we've gone Ohio State at running back, Oregon at quarterback, wide receiver. And this, again, I think could be a toss-up between two teams, depending on what happens the rest of the year. These are three really good teams. So we're splitting hairs on a lot of this. But for me, it's hands down Ohio State. It's hard to believe that Emeka Egbuka is still playing college football. Jeremiah Smith has been as advertised to start the year. And then they still have players like Carnell Tate behind that. It is Ohio State and the weapons at the disposal of Will Howard at the running back and wide receiver position. For a program that's had some elite ones over the last decade, this may be as good of a supporting cast as anyone's ever had to work with in college football.
I would actually give the edge here to Oregon. Not a top-level talent, but I think the depth of the room to me gives them the advantage. Where Jeremiah Smith, I would say, is the most talented receiver in the Big Ten. So I think he has the edge over everybody else. But with that said, I think when you look at Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, if you want to include tight ends here, which I'm assuming we are, and Terrence Ferguson, I think the depth right now, Trayshawn Holden, that Oregon has, the experience, the variety of playmakers that they have, I think for me, I would give the edge right now to Oregon. I like their experience a little bit better, where Carnell Tate was a very highly rated, receiver coming in. He's not also been needed that much, again, with the depth of the wide receiver in the past, but I just feel better. I think the drop-off for me is more significant for Ohio State at the top after Smith and Egbuka compared to what it is for Oregon. I like their depth. I think it's a little bit more well-rounded. I'll take the Ducks here, but I think it's very close.
Offensive line, I'm going to take Oregon because of their two tackles on the offensive line. And I think they're going to settle. I know they had a rough start to the year, but I think now you're going to see what that line's supposed to look like across the board. You get comfortable. Bo Nix was really effective and efficient back there. They also have to learn Gabriel's tendencies as a quarterback. I think that's why they gave up some sacks early. I like Oregon's offensive line.
Going through the first month, I like Ohio State's offensive line. It's the biggest question we had coming in. And I think so far, especially in the run game, they have answered concerns. They've just been paving the way. When you look at Oregon, I think they'll get better with time. And like you said, you learn the quarterback better so you can kind of gel more. They've had some injuries, so they're going to get healthier. But that offensive line, we already talked about, they've allowed more sacks this year than they did all of last year with 7. They've struggled running the ball at times. Right now, through the first month of the season, I think Ohio State's line has been the best, most impressive.
So who has the best offense in the Big Ten?
Wow.
Like we only picked, I guess we didn't do tight end, but that's Tyler Warren from Penn State, obviously, I think,
Yes.
for both of us so far this season.
Wow.
Who has the best offense in the Big Ten? Look how explode. We only picked Penn State at the tight end position, but they've been so explosive. Ohio State's so explosive. Or those are 3 elite offenses. You don't have to name an answer. You don't have to give an answer, but those are three elite. Defensive line. I'm telling you, you don't have to give an answer. Defensive line.
I'm kind of curious. I think it's really interesting. Is it a homer? I don't think it's a homer pick to say Penn State. Even though, like you said, the position group we picked that they have better than everybody else is tight end. Well, like if you look at Ohio State, the competition has kind of necessitated this, but I don't fear their passing game as much overall as they do with Penn State. Oregon's had trouble running the ball. I think there are areas for Ohio State and Oregon through the first month that they just, to me, are not as well-rounded and balanced as Penn State is. I don't think that's crazy to say.
I think for both of us, like our biggest concern with Ohio State is on the offensive side. Like I can glean yours is Will Howard. For me, it's the Ohio State offensive line. All-American guard Donovan Jackson came back against Marshall. They're averaging 7 yards per carry. They're rotating at right guard, but they've played well. They haven't had any pressure against Will Howard. But why am I still saying offensive line? Because they return everyone from last year. They basically are rolling the same O-line from last year, and I still don't trust it. And for you, you're saying Will Howard isn't on the level of Drew Aller or Dylan Gabriel at this point. Like I can see why you're not saying Ohio State. I think because of their running backs and wide receivers, I would maybe lean the Buckeyes' way until proven otherwise. But the concern for as talented as Ohio State is on the offensive side of the football, I think we're also, both of us, our biggest concern about Ohio State is on the offensive side of the football.
And because also we saw last year, Kyle McCord, different quarterback than Will Howard, and Howard's supposed to be an upgrade. But we saw last year, no matter what talent you have at running back, tight end, receiver, if that offense line is not blocking, and in the biggest games it struggled, and if the quarterback's not making plays in the biggest games he struggled, they are either in a close game against Penn State where they squeeze it out, or they lose to Michigan. And so it's like
I think it's important. I think it's important to say too, like when we're pointing at a weakness or a deficiency or a concern, the reason it's a concern for these teams would be this is what prevents them from being not in the college football playoff, but prevents them from being in the championship or semifinals. Like for all of these teams, the goal is not only to make the playoffs, but to make a deep run. If they were to fall short of making the Final Four, Elite Eight, whatever you want to call it, this would be why. And that, again, it's like splitting hairs, but that would be why, no hair jokes on this podcast, that would be why about Ohio State for me and for you on the offensive side. And I think it's real easy to say, I still think they do have the best offense, maybe the most proven offense, but yeah, that's kind of where I sit with them. Let's quickly go through, I want to get through the biggest concern for Penn State and Oregon as well, but continue ranking like the defensive side because I think it's been a fun exercise so far. Really quick, defensive line, Ohio State, right? Like with what they got, Sawyer, JT, Tyleik Williams at D tackle. There's all 3 lines are good again, but Ohio State linebacker, Penn State. I mean, I guess it probably depends where you classify Abdul Carter, who's been a rush DN so far this season. But even without him, Kobe King and Tony Rojas, who didn't play many snaps against Kent State, and you can understand why. But linebacker Penn State, is that the best of the group?
I would say so, yeah. Especially if you want to put Abdul Carter in that group as a kind of a hybrid guy, I would say so.
And then defensive backfield, Caleb Downs has been everything and more than advertised. So Ohio State. So Ohio State and Penn State, we trust their defenses more than Oregon's what we're saying.
Right. Yes. And obviously when we get to that game here on October 12th against the Buckeyes for Oregon, that defense is going to be under the spotlight big time. But like you said, clearly defensively, Ohio State has a superior advantage against Oregon. And I would still say has the upper hand against Penn State. Would you say with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think it's so close. I think it's so close. And just because, like, as we rank that, so I'll give the quick tabulations. For me, I had Ohio State the best we did 9 different position groups at 4 of the 9. I had Penn State at 2 and Oregon at 2. Meanwhile, you had Ohio State at 4 of the 9, Penn State at 2, and Oregon at 2. So by our tabulations, Ohio State's got the most of the best skill position and overall position groups. But I don't know that it makes them, the best team because do those concerns, do the deficiencies outweigh them? But I thought it was just a fun exercise to kind of talk about these teams and compare when, it's been really easy so far this year through a month to say, okay, they're the best 3 teams. But here truly is how they stack up as you start to flip the calendar. And we know there's one big game this week, Penn State and Illinois. There's some other interesting games, but the slate's not all that great this week. So I'd rather spend time talking about teams that deserve to be talked about than really diving deep into Minnesota versus Michigan. No, granted, the little brown jug is on the line.
It is.
Right? We don't get that. Those rivalries, like, there's the protected rivalries in college football. You're going to have the Red River. You're going to have the game. Georgia and Florida are going to play. But games like Michigan and Minnesota used to mean something and be something. They might not even play. Half the time, they're not going to play anymore.
Yeah. That is the one sad part about conference realignment. A lot of the bigger ones will still be protected, but a lot of the smaller ones, like you said, historical rivalries, some interesting trophies, Penn State, Michigan State, the land grant trophy that weighs 1,000,000 pounds. You miss some of those. Like I said, it's not on a consistent basis, which is the one downside of inviting 4 teams and having an 18-team conference with only 9 conference games. You do miss out on some of that. Really quickly, before we get to Max Ralph, Trip, we talked about Ohio State concern. Oregon concern, Penn State concern. Your biggest concern for the Ducks after 1 month is what?
Their defensive line. I think obviously Genty's going to be a Heisman Trophy candidate from Boise State, but they're averaging about 5 yards per carry almost against. They've given up 134 rush yards. They have 7 sacks. It's an okay number through the start of the season. How are they going to hold up on the defensive line against the new physicality of the Big Ten? They lost Brandon Corliss from last year's team. They've got some young talent. They've got some transfers coming in. Derek Harmon from Michigan State has been really good for them so far. But overall, I think that defensive line for me is a question mark for Oregon. I don't know that it was in the beginning of the year, but after watching the first month of the year, I'm a little worried about that position.
I would agree. But for the sake of throwing something different out there and having a different conversation, I would say offensive line as well. In part because I think when you look at their schedule, the 2 biggest games for the Ducks remaining, Ohio State, obviously, and then at Michigan. And when you look at both those games specifically, we talk about the concern about the defense of Oregon. One of the ways you help out your defense in those games is by keeping them off the field. And by how you keep them off the field, right, is sustaining drives offensively. Oregon, we know they could score in a blink of an eye. They have no problem going up and down the field in 3 plays, 35 seconds, and just scoring in a blink. But I think to win both of those games, you have to really control the clock, control the tempo, keep your defense off because both teams, I think, are going to try to run the ball down the Ducks' throat. And I think you need your offensive line to be able to get a push and establish a run game. And that's a question I have going into both of those games of, are they good enough to actually do that? We thought so going into the year. The first month of the season would say otherwise. Is the O-line good enough to sustain drives, to eat up some clock, to give your defense a break so where they're not, basically like we saw at USC, on the field for 40 minutes and getting gassed?
And I think the two things we said go hand in hand there, right? Offensive line, defensive line, trenches. How do they hold up
Right.
against the Big Ten? I think their tackles are elite tackles on the offensive side. I think now that they've got their guy back in the middle of that line, I think they'll be better there. For Penn State, as surprising as that may be for Oregon, for Penn State, I think it might be their defense to this point of the year. Losing KJ Winston for the foreseeable future, a first-round pick at safety. They changed their defense to really have three safeties and move Jalen Reed up into a lion position, kind of like that nickel corner, allow him to play closer to the line of scrimmage. Are they going to be able to do that with him the rest of the year? Their pass rush, everyone has said Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton may be the best DN tandem outside of Columbus, maybe in the Big Ten overall, maybe one of the best in all of college football. Small sample size, but they haven't shown it a ton yet. And I don't know that it's an incredibly deep Penn State. I think it's a talented Penn State defense. I think there's some young guys that have talent that have gotten opportunities. But what we saw the first couple of weeks, if you're watching Penn State right now, you probably feel more confident about them scoring points necessarily than coming up with a stop. And again, that's nitpicking because they shut out Kent State, allowed 60 yards in the game, played a great second half against Bowling Green, kept Garrett Green and West Virginia completely under wraps in that game. It's nitpicking, but for me, if it's Penn State, just a little bit of concern about where the defense is, and really that won't get answered. You'll get some answers against Illinois this weekend, but probably not until at USC do you really learn how good that defense will be. A lot to learn, though, in the next three games for Penn State defensively. It probably shouldn't be a concern because of their track record, but for me, if you're trying to find one with Penn State, it would be that. I was leaning wide receivers, but they've made enough big plays, and you have to go with what you've seen so far on the field.
Right. That was definitely a thought in my head as well. And like you said, the receivers, I mean, going into the year, you could argue easily the biggest concern, but they have made big plays. They are, they have really kind of turned it around from last year, even previous years as well. They have been one of the strengths of this team now in the new Andy Kotelnicki offense. For me, Trip, I look at coaching. I'll be honest with you. I look at coaching right now, and can this team get over the hump? One thing that at least I feel when I watch Penn State in these big games, when they play Ohio State, when they play Michigan, when they play a top team, it feels like to me, Penn State philosophy-wise plays in these games not to lose instead of trying to play to win. And I think they finally, for the first time really since Joe Moorhead was there for the Nittany Lions in 2016, 2017, they have an offense that could compete with anybody in the country in terms of play calling and scheme and getting guys open and having answers for what the other defense is going to do to you. And now it's just, can you put that together? We saw obviously Penn State's two best years they've had under Franklin in terms of winning big games and winning bowl games 2016, 2017. Can they now, in these big games against Ohio State, even on the road at USC, can you still keep that aggressive mindset and play to win instead of playing more conservatively and kind of playing not to lose? That's how I feel. Do you get that sense at all?
I wish you would have included Illinois in that to perfectly tee up our next segment. We got a top 20 matchup in Happy Valley
I know.
this weekend. I think they've been in all of those games. I think the last couple of years they've relied on keeping it close because they knew they had some deficiencies on the offensive side. I think everyone is keenly aware of what Penn State and James Franklin's record has been since that win against Ohio State in 2016, against Ohio State and both Michigan, when they're ranked in the top 10, top 15 of the country. I think everyone's aware of it. I don't see it as a coaching thing. I just see it as an execution and talent thing. I believe in James Franklin at Penn State. I know that that's like a polarizing thing to say. But I believe in James Franklin. I think his game management has been good. I think there's been, a few head scratchers here or there, but it's more of them not executing than something that the coach does. I think he's put them in a position to be in those games and win the big games. And I don't think he coaches those games any different. They just haven't played well enough to win.
Few big tests, like you said, coming up here, but the big one here. Apologies, Illinois. We got a good first test here, top 20 matchup in Beaver Stadium on Saturday. To break that down a little bit more, we welcome Max Ralph of PennLive.com, covers the Nittany Lions, does a great job covering their football team. He will join us next.
Well, as Ryan said, Max Ralph joins us from Penn Live. You can follow him on social media. You see his handle on your screen. If you're watching on our YouTube page, if you're listening, it's at @MaxRalph_. Max, appreciate the time going into this big matchup at Beaver Stadium Saturday night. Number 19 Illinois at number 9 Penn State. Just like everyone thought a couple of months ago when the schedule came out, you'd have prime time between these two teams and two top 20 teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you guys having me on. Happy to be here. It's funny. I mean, this game was a little bit in the discussion for the whiteout, and obviously ended up being Washington, but might have been the wrong choice. Who knows?
Well, that whiteout energy has been a big point of discussion this week, especially here in Happy Valley. Before we get into the matchup, because you're around Penn State, as I am, on a day-to-day basis, a couple of big picture Penn State questions. First of all, Tom Allen last week was moved up into the press box, and obviously the Penn State defense pitched a shutout, played tremendous against Kent State, but I think some question marks for fans after the game against Bowling Green. Without KJ Winston for the foreseeable future, what's your evaluation of what the Penn State defense is going into their first conference game of the year and really a big test against Illinois?
I think it's a fair point to have some concerns following up from that Bowling Green game because, look, it's a MAC opponent who came out and kind of took it to you on the field offensively. But the other thing to keep in mind is that Bowling Green team is really good for the MAC. They went on the road at Texas A&M and played very well again. So you saw exactly what you wanted against Kent State, a dominating defense. And that change we have heard from players on the defensive side of the ball had a great conversation after practice last night with Kobe King that the changes that Penn State has made, partially in moving Tom Allen to the box, some different things that they've done with the in-helmet communication. It's actually no longer Tom Allen who's in Kobe King's helmet. It's actually defensive analyst Dan Connor, which is an interesting thing. That and just having a backup plan to signal if they need to on the field really changed some things for them last week. And that was all we heard from Kobe last night. And he was really interesting. It's a unit that is just still gelling, is really the best way to say it. You think about what they've got in that secondary. It's two transfers who have started a lot. Cam Miller's played a ton at Penn State, but then beyond those three, it's just a young group. Elliott Washington, Zion Tracy, Davian Collins. It's a young secondary, and then you lose one of the best safeties in the nation. You kind of get that gelling process hindered a little bit. So I think just when you look at the slow start maybe for the defense, it's okay to be concerned in some regard. But when you think about all the factors that have gone into it, I think it's unsurprising the results that have happened to this point. And personally, I don't think it's a unit that you should worry about at all. This pass rush is getting up to speed. As soon as they get those communication things figured out, they're not going to have mental lapses on the field. And so I'm expecting a pretty good performance this weekend against Illinois.
You mentioned changes, Max. Obviously, a lot of them have been defensively, but on the other side of the ball, offensively, I mean, the biggest change is bringing in Andy Kotelnicki from Kansas now to call the plays. And this Penn State offense this year compared to last year seems like night and day in terms of explosiveness, points per game, passing, rushing, kind of everything. What's been the biggest difference that you've noticed so far in this Penn State offense through 3 games with Kotelnicki calling the plays between this year and last year?
Boy, there's a ton of them, isn't there? It's kind of hard to pick just one because you could go down the line. I mean, it starts with the quarterback always, and Drew, truthfully, just seems so much more comfortable. We talked to him all year last year. Of course, he's the starting quarterback for the first time, but when we talked to him this year, you can just kind of feel it from him. He's got a different air about him. He's clearly more confident. And just you can see it on the field, too. I mean, the way that he has controlled the pocket, he's decisive in hitting his receivers. I thought last week against Kent State, obviously, this is probably the worst team in the FBS that Penn State's playing. But Penn State wanted that 2-minute drill practice at the end of the first half. James Franklin called his timeouts to get it there. Drew just looked so good on that 2-minute drill. He knew that he had a timeout in his back pocket that allowed him to use the middle of the field. He's moving around in the pocket, threw a great ball on the sideline. just surgical, really. So I think that's one of the biggest changes is the way that Drew is playing and carrying himself right now. And a lot of that goes back to what Andy Kotelnicki has done. We've heard from a ton of players. Nick Dawkins, the center, yesterday, I actually asked him about the two young quarterbacks that Penn State has on their roster and what those guys have done. And it was kind of a adjacent answer. He said, well, part of it is Andy Kotelnicki's made it really easy to learn the scheme. So there are just a ton of changes. I think that wide receiver room as well has been much improved, and really not by many personnel changes. Obviously, Julian Fleming's the new guy in, but a lot of those guys were here last year. So they've just gotten a chance in a more, I guess, receiver-friendly offense to show what they've been able to do. So, yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about what's new with that Penn State offense, but I think it starts at the top with Drew, and it just kind of trickles down through. Really, Andy Kotelnicki's been very impressive.
Max, the sample size is still small through 4 weeks of a college football season, but Ryan and I started this podcast by talking a ton about a Big Ten hierarchy. And I think it's pretty clear at this point, Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon are the top three teams in the league, albeit still really early in the season. Where do you feel like you obviously have a strong conviction that Penn State looks a lot better on offense? They have a good defense and have proven to be good defensively. Where do you feel like they fit within that hierarchy right now as they head into Big Ten play?
Yeah, like you mentioned, it's so hard to say just because these early season games, I mean, you always get a few every year where teams struggle more than you expect them to. But those first 2 weeks of the year, Oregon wasn't really doing what we thought they were going to do against lesser teams. And Penn State has the game against Bowling Green. And then, Michigan comes out and gets stomped by Texas, but then beats a pretty good USC team. So it's really hard to tell. And truthfully, I'm not sure any of us are going to have the answer until November 2nd when Ohio State comes to Beaver Stadium. And also the Buckeyes play Oregon this year. So those are really the games that you're going to have to watch to truly know where this all ends up. But honestly, I do think that Penn State is pretty solidly in that number 2 spot in the Big Ten for my power rankings right now, just because, we saw what we needed to see out of the offense through those first few weeks of the year. It's not what we expected, but the offense was actually carrying the defense through when times got tough in the non-conference, which, coming in, everybody would have thought it would have been the opposite. Who knows how long it's going to take Kotelnicki to get this group going. And the defense has been so good for the past 3 to 5 years that why would that change, even though Tom Allen's coming in? So considering that we've seen the things out of Penn State that we felt like we needed to see to prove they belong in that upper echelon of the Big Ten, I feel pretty good about still saying that they're there. In the preseason, I said, I think Penn State goes 10-2, probably loses on the road at USC because of all the travel that goes on there. I'm a little more 50-50 on that game now, having seen USC and Penn State a little bit, but I do still think number 2 in the Big Ten is where I'd put them.
You look now at the schedule, Max. Obviously, it's a tough opener at West Virginia, hostile environment, but Penn State looked really well in that game, kind of blowing out the Mountaineers. But now as you go into Big Ten play, this is really where the schedule actually starts. You got obviously a top 20 opponent this week in Illinois. You're at USC. Ohio State comes down, like you mentioned, 3 top 20 opponents here in the next 6 weeks. So far, outside of 1/2 for Penn State, so far so good this season. Is there one area, though, that you have a question mark, a concern about as now the competition increases, or you're just excited to see against better competition? How does this area of the team play against better competition?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the secondary for sure, because the pass rush is kind of where a lot of people are gonna point to immediately and say, oh, well, they've only got 4 sacks this season. This team should be getting so many more. They've got talented edge rushers. But really, if you go back and you watch the games, those guys are this close to getting home. They're affecting the quarterback, and especially against Bowling Green, the ball was coming out way too fast for any pass rush to get home. So I think the secondary is really the group that you have a question mark about, because as I mentioned at the top, they're just gelling together. It's a bunch of guys who haven't played together, and really the secondary, as much as any position on the field, you kind of have to have that chemistry and that time together to trade off coverages and really understand who's covering who when, the offense lines up in a bunch formation, et cetera. So I think that group, especially after the loss of KJ Winston, is really where my eyes turn, and especially also to like a freshman, Dejan Lane, and how he can come along, how quickly he can come along to allow Jalen Reed to go back to that nickel cornerback position, because Jalen Reed was excellent against West Virginia and then had to move back to that full-time safety role after Winston got hurt against Bowling Green. So there's just a few more question marks about that secondary. You know, they haven't necessarily caused the disruption in the passing game that you'd like to see from them to this point. So if there's a question, that's where I'd put it.
When you think of Illinois traditionally, you don't necessarily think of the Illini coming in or wherever it's being played as being a big test for that secondary. But Luke Altmaier has played mistake-free football. He looks every bit of a veteran Big Ten quarterback that has experience completing passes at a high rate. And he's got two real weapons in Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin. What kind of test is that for that Penn State secondary, and what are the things that you're looking forward to seeing in the matchup between Illinois and Penn State on Saturday night?
Yeah, it's a huge one. I'm gonna keep harping on the secondary, but because Penn State plays so much man coverage in what they do in Tom Allen's defense, that really brings in Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin, as you mentioned, as a difficult test for the guys out there, because Bryant is a big-bodied guy, really talented, and Franklin, of course, has some SEC experience. He was on that Ole Miss team that beat Penn State in the Peach Bowl. Didn't play a ton, but they're both really good receivers. And when you've got those two guys, it makes life easy for Luke Altmaier, because I do think he's an improved quarterback compared to the guy who threw 4 interceptions against Penn State last year. James Franklin said he might be one of the most improved guys in the country, but you know, I don't know how much of a difference it is between Altmaier is that much better, and those receivers are making life really, really easy for him. So all of the man coverage that Penn State's going to have to play, those cornerbacks are going to be put to the test. And I think that's exactly where you got to look. But also, I mean, don't count out what Brett Bielema is going to do on the ground, because, I mean, we all remember that 2021 game. And I just, Illinois is just always in some form going to stay true to its identity, especially under Bielema. So I think it's going to be a balanced offense this weekend.
When you look at this matchup, Max, it's a top 20 matchup, so you think that's okay. A close one, should be competitive, but Vegas at least says otherwise. The spread last time I looked, 18 points right now in favor of the Nittany Lions. Maybe outside of just the passing offense and the explosiveness that we've seen from some of these receivers from Illinois, is there another area you're looking at to where if Illinois is going to make this a tough game, make it a one-possession game here in the fourth quarter, pull off an upset? Is there an area you see that really can kind of concern you, or they can exploit here in this game on Saturday night?
Yeah, I think if they're going to make it close, which I think they will, I think that spread is too big. Maybe Penn State pulls away late, but I do think Illinois is going to be tough, at least for the first half. If they're going to do that, I think they got to make Drew Allard turn the ball over. They've got a talented secondary this year. I think his name is blanking in my mind, but I think one of their corners has 2 interceptions on the year. Allard pointed him out specifically. Yep, there you go. Allard pointed him out to us this week. So I think if they're going to do it, they got to create short fields on the defensive side of the ball. Allard has that 1 interception against Bowling Green this year that, it didn't look great. He owned up to it. So yeah, I think if that's what they're going to do, if they're going to keep it close, I think that's where it comes from. And I wouldn't truly be surprised if Allard throws an interception this week, because that Illinois defense is really quite good. 12.5 points to opponents so far this year.
Max, we really appreciate it. Thanks for breaking down the matchup and breaking down the Nittany Lions. You do a great job on the Penn State beat. We enjoy reading your work.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, guys.
You knew I picked the guest this week because I thought he was really good. Appreciate Max Ralph from Penn Live joining us here on the podcast. Ryan, we've talked a lot about Penn State. We've talked about this matchup a bit, obviously talked about it with Max. Penn State, Illinois, the big spread honestly surprises me as well. I think Penn State, because of their explosive ability, what they've shown on the offensive side, playing at home in that environment, they've got a more complete defense with better playmakers. Penn State should win the game. But I love what Max said about turnovers. If Illinois plays a clean game, if they can limit possessions, if they can create a couple of big plays to shorten the field for their offense, the thing that's impressed me most too, not only about Altmaier and not turning the ball over, their defense is forced 7. They're +7 in turnovers. They have all the interceptions. They forced 12 fumbles, but have only recovered 4 this year. So they've had an opportunity for more. Illinois has scored on 35 straight trips to the red zone. So they have cashed in. They need to make sure, though, when they're in the red zone, they're turning those trips into touchdowns in this game. I think there's a path there for Illinois to be really competitive in the game, but it's going to be I'm still not sold on how talented they are. I think they're playing winning football. I think they're playing good football. I think they're a really well-coached football team. I think teams that are physical like this and lean on a run game or extra linemen have given Penn State some trouble. Illinois itself in 2021, the 9 overtime game that Max talked about, Michigan the last couple of years and the way that they've schemed against Penn State. I think they've given Penn State trouble. But I could also see this going as the way of, okay, here's a team coming in that's good but not great. And we just spent 15, 20 minutes talking about how great Penn State, Oregon, and Ohio State are. I could see this going the way of Penn State, Iowa last year, the whiteout, and it just being all Nittany Lions if they're firing on all cylinders. But there is a path for Illinois to keep it close, with how clean they've played, by forcing a couple turnovers and by making it uncomfortable. They can't fall behind, though, Illinois. I really like Penn State for the obvious reasons, but I can see how there could be some optimism, and reasonably so, and rightfully so, for Illinois in this game. That spread seems outlandish. It really does. I can see how it gets there, but it seems outlandish.
We'll get your official pick against the spread here in a little bit, but I'm with you. I'm with Max. I think the only way this game is truly close is if Penn State turns the ball over and if you're Illinois, +2, +3, because you just look at the talent on both sides. Penn State is much more talented on both sides of the ball in certain areas, run game, pass game. The thing with Illinois, they are elite at turning the ball over. Like you said, they have a +7 so far turnover differential. That's 3rd in the country. They've been elite at forcing turnovers, not giving the ball away. But they don't do anything else well. For how well Luke Altmaier, Zachary Franklin, Pat Bryant have been in the passing game, they're not a top 50 passing team. They're not a top 50 rushing team. They don't do one thing great outside of forcing turnovers. So if you are the Illini, I just don't think you can line up with Penn State and say, let's just play the game and expect the better team to win and that be you. You need to cause turnovers. I think you have to go into your bag of tricks here and maybe try to break out a trick play or two just to give yourself some sort of advantage. Because if it truly is, hey, we're just going to line up and play football, I think Penn State wins and they win this game handily.
No, I completely agree with you there. I can't wait to be on the sideline. They're calling for maybe some light rain during the day. Hopefully that, hey, it wouldn't be a Saturday.
What is it with you? My goodness.
It wouldn't be a Saturday without that, but be on the sideline. Should be an awesome, awesome environment. And I think
really
Penn State rides that environment.
What do you expect from the crowd? This right now is the only scheduled night game. James Franklin's talked about the whiteout energy. Are you expecting a raucous, loud, charged up crowd?
Yeah, I think it'd be awesome. I think people are really bought in that they can make a difference. They know what the home schedule is with UCLA being down, Washington being down, an opportunity to face a really good team at home. It's not a great home schedule for Penn State. The schedule is great for Penn State. It works out really well, but it's not a great home schedule. So I think this is a chance under the lights at night to simulate that whiteout environment. I think it will be a true whiteout on Saturday. And I think this ends up being, because of all that, it just seems like all the pieces are there for Penn State to have a statement type game. Even though I think Illinois, you could talk yourself into Illinois coming in here and maybe even winning in Beaver Stadium.
Hey,
but you have to really, you have to sell yourself on that way more than you have to sell yourself on Penn State. You have to start, your mind starts to wander. You go down the road, you keep going down the road. You have to sell yourself to get there. For Penn State, you don't have to do that.
Speaking of selling, let's go to Piscataway. Friday night, Washington at Rutgers. I think if you're Rutgers, you could sell this game as the biggest home game since 2006 when Louisville came to town. This is a great opportunity for the Scarlet Knights, not only, welcoming in a new Big Ten opponent in Washington, but a really strong start to the year, a nice win over Virginia Tech. We've talked about, the Rutgers being a team that you want to get to 8 wins, 9 wins with the schedule you have. Win a game like this, it should be a really good atmosphere in Piscataway on Friday night in a nice window here where they are one of the few games on to get some attention on Rutgers.
With a win, Rutgers gets to 4-0 for the first time since 2012. My question in this game is, how does Rutgers contain the big play potential through the air of Will Rogers? 76% completions, over 1,000 yards passing already for Washington this season at 3-1. Jonah Coleman, 5'9", 230 at running back, is averaging 7 yards per carry for Washington. Their offense has not been great. Like that, their defense has been.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's still potential for that offense to be better. But the cross-country travel
on a short week.
Yeah, this is another tough one. Like Rutgers, everything lines up for you to pick Rutgers, but Washington's defense has played well. Rogers is probably the better quarterback in the game. A true toss-up. True toss-up. Rutgers probably needs some balance. They need the running game. They didn't really have the running game going last week. They need that running game to be balanced with Kelly McManus. They've gotten good play from their tight end in the passing game. They need balance in this game, I think.
We talked about on Monday's pod the impressiveness of how Rutgers beat Virginia Tech, because the Virginia Tech's run defense was porous all through the year, and they really bottled up Monangai and forced Kelly McManus to beat them through the air. To his credit, he did it, had some big plays in the passing game. The receivers made some nice plays as well. But I'm not sold that is sustainable for Rutgers, as they can rely on the passing attack every week to win them games. I think they have to get back to the running game. And I'm with you, like, Washington's defense is one of the best in the country. They're 11th in the country in terms of right now points per game allowed. So it's going to be tough sledding. Can you lean on the run game when maybe everybody knows it's coming and still have success? That's the mark of a good team. I think for Rutgers, I think that's important for them to establish, because if we're talking about, again, that 8-9 win range, you not only need balance, I think you need to be leaning on that run game first and foremost to set up the passing game. And if that's taken away for the second week in a row, that is, to me, concerning about right now the future for Rutgers offensively in terms of them having enough success to put points on the board to win, 3, 4, 5, 6 more games.
I think low-scoring defensive battle. Washington, Rutgers, first to 20 wins the game. First to 20. Is that fair?
Old school. We had some throwback Big Ten games last week. I think so. I'm with you. I think this would be kind of a tough, hard-nosed game. You wouldn't think that with like an air raid offense that Washington would be a tough, hard-nosed team. I'm with you.
They are with Jet Fish. They are with Jet Fish. Michigan State's going to need more than 20 at home to beat Ohio State. Can they keep this competitive, Ryan?
No. I don't think so, because I think Aidan Chiles just turns the ball over too much. And, he has 7 total touchdowns, 8 turnovers, including 7 interceptions. And you can overcome that against Maryland and Boston College to either win the game in the Terrapins case or be within 1 score against BC. You throw 2-3 interceptions against Ohio State with how well that defense is playing, with how well that run game is churning out, it's curtains. So unless they play a clean game, a very clean game, which so far Chiles has not been able to do, I don't think so. You could have, I think, a nice dazzling touchdown, maybe get off to an early start, 10-7, 7-3, can get out to an early lead. But I think with his propensity to turn the ball over, I think this gets ugly pretty quick here, especially in the second half. I think we're talking about a snoozer.
Yeah, I think there's 2 games where you're like, okay, top teams of the league playing this week: Ohio State at Michigan State, Wisconsin at USC. I don't think either of those are close. I think USC bounces back in a big way. They're at home against Wisconsin. The Badgers seem one-dimensional with Tyler Van Dyke out. I don't think there's much of a threat through the air. Michigan seemed one-dimensional last week, and it didn't slow them down.
That's right.
But Wisconsin's not as talented as Michigan is. USC, the second half, dominated that game against Michigan. I think they throw it all over against Wisconsin. 2 games that you look at the names: Ohio State, Michigan State, Wisconsin, USC, on paper could be, if you didn't know anything about the teams, like, oh, that's interesting. That's why we wanted to see the new Big Ten. Wisconsin at USC, that's a fascinating game. But because of how things have played out, I think USC is a true college football playoff contender as well. Those are 2 games that, in name only, are intriguing this weekend because they're over by halftime.
I would agree. I think we'll get an intriguing game all game long. Maryland, Indiana.
Yeah.
You talk about the first of 20 in Rutgers-Washington. first to 50, maybe could win this game. Two explosive offenses right now in Maryland and Indiana. How about Ty Felton? We've given him credit before, Trip, on this pod, but he has been tremendous this year for Maryland, not just in the Big Ten. Look at where he ranks in all of college football. 41 receptions on the year, first in all the country. 600 receiving yards, second. And you look at PFF here, they track some of these that are really interesting. Felton has 304 yards after the catch, that yak, first in all of college football, and he's forced 13 missed tackles. So not only is he getting open and catching the ball at a high rate, he's also breaking tackles and taking a 10-yard slant into a 50-yard touchdown. That's first, by the way, those missed tackles, first in all of college football. Again, thank you to PFF for those stats. He is an incredible receiver where they do have an abundance of them at Maryland. You look at Indiana right now with Curtis Rourke and their offense. I can't wait. This is going to be an offensive explosion here, I think, in Bloomington.
Yeah, and I think Indiana, because they're at home and they've been the sign of a great team, and we talked about it Monday really quick, the sign of a great team is a team that blows people out. I think Indiana takes care of business in a pretty big way. Yeah, you talk about Felton though. Give Billy Edwards Jr. a little credit too, replacing Tunga Vailoa, who was there forever, and he's taken the torch well from Talia. You're right. Interesting game. You think it might be close for a while? I think Indiana just takes care of it, man. I am all in right now on what the Hoosiers have going, and they have struck with what they have at the quarterback position. The line in that game is Indiana 7-point home favorites. Let's get into our picks. Indiana 7-point home favorites.
You're on this game. You take it. Are you saying Indiana blowout here? They win and cover?
Yeah, easily cover.
I think they pull away late and cover the 7, but I think this is a fun back and forth. I'll say 41-31 kind of game. I do think Maryland can put up some points here on this Indiana defense, but I think at the end, Indiana is just too talented on both sides of the ball. They win and cover, but I would say for 3 quarters here, I think we get a close one and a back and forth one in Bloomington.
Washington at Rutgers. Rutgers 2.5-point favorites at home. I like Rutgers 20-18.
Oh, okay. I like the score. I'm going to go Rutgers wins and covers, maybe like 20-13, 23-14, somewhere in that range. I think they do win here by just about a touchdown. I think the cross-country short week does hurt Washington. I think right now Rutgers they're the tougher team of both sides. I think they win this one in a close, low-scoring game, but they cover the 2.5.
Michigan 9.5-point favorites at home against Minnesota for the Little Brown Jug.
Well, I mean, I guess the good news is for Minnesota, Caleb Johnson's not on the other side of the field for you, but give me Michigan. That running attack looks back. I think Michigan wins and covers here.
Is that on Peacock or something? Because I'm not sure I want to watch that. Nebraska at Purdue. Nebraska's 10-point favorites on.
Big noon kickoff. No subscription
only
needed.
Only slightly better than last week's Marshall at Ohio State. Nebraska. I think Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt are fun to listen. I think Joel is as prepared as any. I think Gus is good. Like, he's got a shtick, but he's good. But them saying, Gus opening the broadcast last week by going, great to be back at OH, and then Joel Klatt replying, IO, the Fox Big Noon kickoff. Just leave it at that. Nebraska, 10-point favorites at Purdue.
I will take Nebraska here. The one thing I will say, I'm nervous about in this game, we're interested to see, how does Nebraska bounce back after a letdown? That place was electric on Friday night, obviously a crushing way to lose, but that's a young team. And we could see maybe a lack of veteran experience. And maybe it's an easier time to have a hangover if you're still young and experienced about that loss last week, still have it catch up to you and have Purdue be in this game. I think Nebraska pulls away late, but I think in the first half here, you'll see a little bit of a slower start and maybe still some of that Illinois loss lingering over the Cornhuskers.
I agree with you on that. I think that's a really, really smart observation. Wisconsin at USC. USC 15.5-point favorites. And is that line enough?
No. You said it before.
Yeah.
I mean, USC is, if they are as good as we think, which we think they're pretty good, you should blow out Wisconsin. Blow them out.
Yeah, I don't think they're great defensively. I think they're improved. But I think they're a team that's somewhere between the 10th and 20th best team in the country. And Wisconsin is not near that this year, especially without a quarterback. Ohio State, 23.5 on the road at Michigan State. We've seen Michigan State at home in the past surprise Ohio State. We've seen him on the road surprise Ohio State. This is a new Michigan team. Jonathan Smith I think Jonathan Smith will have him ready to play. I don't know that it changes what's going to be the final result.
I would agree. Yeah, like I said, I just don't trust right now Chiles to keep the ball safe and not give Ohio State extra possessions, especially in their own end. I think we can get, again, maybe a fun first quarter, fun first half, but I think at the end, Ohio State pulls away, covers the almost, 3 touchdown and a field goal spread. I think they win by 4 touchdowns or more.
In the Pac-12, UCLA is hosting Oregon, 25.5 point favorite. 25.5 points for a conference game. No, come on.
Welcome to the Big Ten, Oregon.
25.5 for a conference game. Never should happen. This isn't Vandy, Alabama.
We just had a 23-point spread with Michigan State and Ohio State.
25.5.
So can UCLA make it competitive? Can they keep it within 4 touchdowns?
Illinois at Penn State. Okay, let's move on.
Safe to say Trip and I are the same there. The Ducks cover and win in the blowout.
19th ranked Illinois at 9th ranked Penn State. I think Penn State wins. I think they win easy, somewhere right near. Vegas knows, right? I think it's somewhere right near that line, 17, 18 points.
37-17. Penn State over Illinois. I think they win. I think they cover. I just think right now the talent too much. The talent is too much, I should say, for Illinois to overcome. And Drew Aller, Max mentioned it. The one thing he has been really good at, even going back to last year when he got criticized often, he doesn't turn the ball over. He does not throw interceptions whatsoever. He has 2 picks in his career. I think that will continue here. It's not going to give Illinois and Xavier Scott second, third opportunities here to capitalize. Takes care of the ball, giving Penn State and a big-time cover.
Like I said, you could talk yourself. There is a path. This is my favorite thing. There's a path. There's a formula for Illinois to get there. There truly is. And the more you read about the game, you can start to sell yourself on the Illini. Ultimately, when Penn State has played teams it's better than for the last 7 years under James Franklin, take away the 2020 COVID year, they have beaten them, and they have beaten them rather easily. And I see, especially at home, Penn State beats teams it's supposed to beat for the most part. And I think that's what happens here. And they do it with rather ease. That's my prediction.
Quick question about the path here for Illinois. 2021, when Illinois beat Penn State in the 9 overtime slop fest. That was hard to watch for both sides, even though Illinois won. They won that game in large part because they brought in 6, 7 offensive linemen to really try to play bully ball.
Hold on. They won that game because Sean Clifford was hurt.
Also true. You are very right about that. But they also ran the ball a lot with big-time jumbo sets. Do you expect that this week? I know we've talked about the Luke Altmaier and passing attack. Do you think Illinois and Brett Bielema, who's there in 2021, throws it back to that kind of rugged old-school game in 2021 or no?
I think we do see some 2-3 tight end sets, some extra lineman sets for Illinois, but they can't rely on that to be their entire offense to have a chance. Penn State's going to score points.
All righty. That will do it here for the Week 5 preview pod. Really appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you check us out on YouTube and wherever you get your pods. Still enrolled. Of course, we'll be back here on Monday to break down everything. Maybe talk about our predictions being right. Definitely talk about if our predictions go haywire. We get some big-time upsets here in the Big Ten. So make sure you subscribe so you get an alert every time a new episode drops. Monday and Thursday are our drop dates. Enjoy the games. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.